Hello everyone, Dark of All Trades here. Now today, I'm going to look at some questions. But this time, rather than addressing questions for atheists, it's going to be questions that a certain theist is being asked. So for this, I'm going to cover a couple of short videos. So let's get right to it. The first video comes from a channel called Matan, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Now I'm not entirely sure what his channel is for. It seems like he talks to a lot of people on various subjects. I don't know his religious position, and I'm not going to presume. He looks a bit young, and some of his videos on his page look a bit, well, reminiscent of being a shock jock on the radio like Howard Stern or something. Though it seems like it's working for him. He has 1.12 million subscribers. Man, I must be in the wrong business. Anyway, before I spiral down, let's take a look at the video. The video is titled, Good News for Atheists. Okay, I love good news. Though in this, he's going to be joined by a man named Cliff Konecki. I'll understand if you turn the video off here. But okay, let's see what the good news for atheists is today.
Only heaven silence for an answer.
If you had to get rid of any race, which would you pick?
None.
You wouldn't pick anyone?
No way. All human beings are equally valuable because they're all created in the image of God. But if you don't believe in God, then you can pick one and say this race is inferior.
So if you're not religious, it's okay to be racist, you're saying?
No.
So that's the whole video. It abruptly cuts off right here at the end. Before I get into it, I want to give Cliff here as much credit as I can. Imagine someone asking you to choose which group of humans should be eliminated. That sounds horrifying, right? This is exactly the scenario that's unfolding here, and it reveals a lot about rhetorical manipulation and ethical reasoning. So first, the problem with the question. The initial question itself is fundamentally unethical. By asking someone to select a race for elimination, Matan creates a morally impossible scenario designed to provoke a shocking response. It's like asking, which of your fingers would you want cut off? There is no acceptable answer. The goal isn't to get a meaningful response, but to trap someone in a gotcha moment, forcing them to either engage with the question in an objectionable way or struggle to navigate out of it. Though I want to focus on the response. Cliff's answer risks implying that without religious belief, one might consider racial elimination. While he denies that it's okay, this framing still reinforces a misleading narrative. The reality is that our respect for human life doesn't come from religious mandates, but from things like empirical understanding of human genetic diversity, philosophical principles of universal human rights, and scientific recognition of our shared biological heritage. So what does secular ethics really teach? Well, contrary to Cliff's implication, secular ethical frameworks provide the most robust arguments against racism. Genetic research shows race is a social construct, not a biological reality. Philosophical traditions like humanism emphasize individual and collective human worth, and evolutionary biology demonstrates our interconnectedness as a species. Cliff's reasoning assumes that morality requires a divine source, but in reality, scientific and philosophical principles independently establish why racism is irrational and unethical. Humanism and evolutionary biology affirm our shared worth without invoking religious authority. The belief that morality must be dictated from above ignores the way human societies have, through reason and cooperation, developed ethical principles that foster fairness, justice, and equality. And let's address the underlying assumption here, that without divine authority, morality crumbles. If that were true, we would expect secular nations or individuals to lack moral grounding. Yet we see the opposite. Studies consistently show that societies with higher secular populations tend to have lower crime rates, stronger protections for human rights, and more egalitarian policies. Clearly, moral behavior isn't contingent on a belief in a deity. But here's the real rhetorical sleight of hand. By transforming a provocative question into a theological debate, Cliff accomplishes two things. First, he avoids directly condemning the racist premise. And he also attempts to paint secular thinking as morally suspect. This misdirection subtly shifts the audience's perception, making it seem like he's rejecting religious belief means embracing moral relativism, when in fact, secular ethics offer clear and objective reasons to reject racism. In reality, moral reasoning isn't about obedience to divine command. It's about understanding and applying ethical principles that promote well-being and fairness. The ability to recognize the inherent worth of all people doesn't require supernatural justification. It only requires reason and empathy. At the very least, Cliff could have been funny and said something like, "The race I would get rid of is the marathon, because that one isn't very fun. People sometimes bleed from their nipples due to insufficient preparation for their shirt rubbing against their bodies." So that's the end of the first one. But I have to say, I'm a bit puzzled by the title. The title, Good News for Atheists, seems oddly disconnected from the actual conversation. So I took some time and thought about it, and I came up with a few possibilities for what the title might be suggesting. The good news could be that he upholds the idea that all humans, including atheists, have equal value in his view. If Matan expected him to say something exclusionary, like atheists are less valuable, it might be framed as good news that he didn't. Maybe the title is ironic, implying that atheists should be relieved Cliff didn't say atheists when asked which race he'd eliminate. If Matan thought Cliff might misinterpret race as group of people and say atheists, then his refusal is the so-called good news. It's also possible that the title is just clickbait, designed to make atheists curious about what good news they're supposedly getting, only to find a completely unrelated theological argument. Since the video cuts off right after Cliff denies that atheism makes racism acceptable, it's hard to know if there was going to be more context that might explain the title better. But based on what's here, it doesn't seem like actual good news for atheists, just an attempt to frame the conversation in a way that appeals to a religious audience. So that one was a bit short, and there's no shortage of content from Cliff on the YouTubes, so let's take a look at a second video. This next one I found on a channel called Celestine, which is considerably smaller than the last one, though it's about the same size as mine, and very clear on their religious position. The video is titled, Cliff Answers the Most Difficult Questions Atheist Gives. Well, I'm not sure which atheist gave the questions he's about to answer, but let's find out what the questions and his answers are.
Watch how Cliff answered the most difficult and tough question about God.
Okay, this seems to be an AI voice, and it looks like their picture is AI generated, and it looks like a lot of their shorts have AI art. Okay, I'm not going to diss AI. I don't know enough about it. It can get grating for some people, so let's just try to move past this, as it doesn't change the actual points. So this is just going to be one question, and not only one question, but the most difficult and tough. Important to distinguish that it's not just difficult, but tough as well. Question about God? Okay then, let's see the single question.
If God's so powerful and so loving, why is there so much suffering? Why is there so much evil and destruction? Why does God allow people to get destroyed by circumstances, by other people?
So there is only one question in his big background there, which he's adding on to, which I don't have a problem with, but those are technically different questions, even though they are closely related. But I'm nitpicking, I should just get into the question. So it sounds like he's going to contend with the problem of evil or suffering.
Well, sorry, all of us suffer. It's part of reality.
This is a weird start. By declaring suffering as simply part of reality, Cliff transforms a profound philosophical inquiry into a banal observation. This original question, why is there so much suffering, demands a causal explanation, not a descriptive acknowledgement. This doesn't get us anywhere. But maybe I stopped too early. Let's see what else he has to say.
Is God disinterested?
Again, this isn't what is being asked. It seems like he's trying to shift the focus away from the original issue. Instead of addressing the existence and cause of suffering, Cliff reframes the discussion around whether God cares, an issue that doesn't actually answer the question. Within Christian theology, this redirection is especially flawed. Christianity teaches that God is loving, personal, and actively involved in the world. If Cliff suggests that God might be disinterested, he's risking contradicting that foundation. If God isn't disinterested, then the problem of suffering remains. Why does an all-powerful, all-loving being allow immense suffering to exist? Either way, the original question still demands an answer. This kind of response doesn't explain anything. It avoids engaging with the key issues, causality, intention, and morality, while sidestepping the deeper challenge of theodicy, how to reconcile a supposedly perfect God with the reality of widespread suffering.
First part of the answer is, I do not know. I don't know why God allowed evil and suffering.
Well, I have to give him credit for this. This is the most honest response I have ever heard out of his mouth.
Yeah, but come on, Cliff, you got to think. Well, yeah, we do have to think. You're right. God chose to limit his power by creating us with a free will.
This new statement introduces multiple layers of unexamined assumptions that raise more problems than they solve. If God is truly omnipotent, the idea of self-limitation becomes logically inconsistent. A being with unlimited power cannot be constrained even by itself, because that would mean it was never truly omnipotent to begin with. If God can limit his power, then he's not all-powerful. If he cannot limit his power, then he's not all-powerful. Either way, the claim creates a contradiction. Cliff falsely presents free will as a choice between total autonomy or robotic determinism, ignoring nuanced positions like compatibilism, making this a false dichotomy. More importantly, he never explains why free will must include suffering. Why wouldn't an omnipotent God allow meaningful choices without pain? So his argument raises some deeper questions that Cliff does not address. How can anyone claim to know the motivations of a supposedly ineffable deity? If God is omniscient, wouldn't he have already foreseen this choice and its consequences? Why would a perfect being create a world where suffering is even an option? If God is truly omnipotent and omnibenevolent, why wouldn't he create a reality where people have genuine moral agency without the existence of unnecessary suffering? His supposed self-limitation doesn't resolve this issue, it only shifts the burden of explanation. In the end, this all ties back to the problem of evil. If God cannot prevent suffering, he's not omnipotent. If he chooses not to, he's not all good. Either way, the contradiction remains.
Which means I can either pull out my wallet and give you money to eat lunch, or I can roll this hand into a fist, send it crashing into your handsome face. I am free to do either.
Cliff's example, choosing between generosity and violence, says more about his rhetorical strategy than it does about free will. The setup is designed to be performative, using a dramatic contrast between kindness and aggression to create a simplistic, attention-grabbing illustration. Even the offhand compliment, "your handsome face," subtly works to endear him to the audience. And since we never actually see the person he's speaking to, I can neither confirm nor deny their supposed handsomeness. Now, I don't have a problem with public speakers being performative and using contrasting techniques to grab the audience's attention. It's pretty much the main part of their job. However, this example completely oversimplifies the complexity of human decision-making. Choices don't happen in a vacuum. They're shaped by a vast network of neurological, psychological, social, and environmental factors. The idea that free will is simply about picking between two options like handing over money or throwing a punch ignores how deeply interconnected our decisions are with the world around us. By reducing free will to an oversimplified either-or scenario, Cliff sidesteps the deeper philosophical questions about what truly influences human choice.
And what the Bible teaches is in Genesis chapter 1, God created us in his image, which means we are not robots, we're not machines. And I like to walk, so if I stumble and fall off of this stage, I'm not going to pick myself up at the bottom and say, phew, I'm glad that's over with. That's determinism. That's fatalism. God creates us in his image, which means we're not robots. We're not machines. We're human beings created with a soul, a personality. But it also means we got a free will. And if we want to abuse our free will, we can go right ahead and do it.
Here, Cliff's depiction of determinism isn't just inaccurate, it's an intentional oversimplification designed to make his position seem more reasonable by contrast. His example, falling off stage and saying, phew, I'm glad that's over with, reduces an entire philosophical framework to an emotionless robotic caricature. But that's not how determinism works. Believing in determinism doesn't erase emotions or moral responsibility. Determinism explains them as part of a cause and effect chain. Cliff's claim that determinists would react to suffering like emotionless robots is a pure straw man.
Ouch. You ran over my foot. I am in incredible pain.
And this is where Cliff's argument starts to unravel. He isn't engaging with determinism as it is actually understood. He's setting up a misrepresentation that makes it easy to dismiss, and in doing so, he relies on at least three major logical fallacies. First, he creates an oversimplified, distorted version of determinism, making it seem like determinists believe humans are mindless machines incapable of reflection or emotional depth. He also presents free will and determinism as mutually exclusive, ignoring the possibility of compatibilism, This idea that some aspects of free will and determinism can coexist, as well as any number of other ideas. He then asserts that we have free will simply because the Bible says we are created in God's image, treating a religious claim as if it resolves a deep philosophical debate. But the idea that being created in God's image grants humans free will is not an argument. It's an assumption. It doesn't explain how free will functions, nor does it address the growing body of research in neuroscience and philosophy suggesting that human choices are deeply influenced, if not outright determined, by prior causes. Furthermore, his claim that we are not robots, we are not machines, is just another rhetorical maneuver. No one is saying people feel like machines. The debate is whether our decisions arise from an uncaused, independent will, or whether they are the inevitable result of prior conditions, at least internally with this discussion. Cliff sidesteps this entirely, choosing instead to frame determinism in a way that makes it sound ridiculous rather than actually engaging with its core claims. At the end of the day, his argument relies more on emotional appeal than logic. He wants his audience to instinctively recoil at the idea of determinism by associating it with fatalism and a loss of agency. But this is misleading. Determinism doesn't mean people lack emotions, purpose, or the ability to reflect on their choices. It simply suggests that those choices arise from causal relationships rather than existing as uncaused, spontaneous events. By misrepresenting the position, Cliff isn't actually defending free will. He's just attacking a cartoon version of determinism that no serious philosopher would recognize. And here's a little bonus for you. Now, Cliff isn't the first to try to explain suffering. There are other theodicies, attempts to reconcile God's power and goodness with suffering, but none of them really hold up. Cliff used the free will defense, which argues that suffering exists because God gave humans free will, but this doesn't explain natural suffering like earthquakes or childhood cancer, things that have nothing to do with human choices. There's the soul-making theodicy, which suggests that suffering exists to build character and moral growth. But does extreme suffering like genocide or infant mortality really serve as character building? It just seems cruel. Then there's skeptical theism, which claims we simply can't understand God's reason for allowing suffering. But if that's the case, how can we claim to know anything about God's goodness at all? None of these really solve the problem. They just push it around. Cliff doesn't even try to engage with these, instead opting for an oversimplified free will defense that ignores major challenges. And that's the end of this short. So what is Cliff responding to here? What is the most difficult and tough question about God? If God is so powerful and so loving, why is there so much suffering? Why is there so much evil and destruction? Why does God allow people to get destroyed by circumstances and by other people? And his answer seems to be, well, I don't know why God allows evil and suffering, but God chose to limit his power by giving us free will. That means we can choose to help or harm others. God created us in his image, not as robots, so we have the freedom to make choices, even bad ones. So what do you think about his responses from these two videos? Did he address the questions head on? Does free will really explain suffering, or is this just another excuse for an inconsistent worldview? Do you think he followed the 5 Ds here?
Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
Let me know what you think of his response in the comments below. Overall, I give Cliff a near-perfect 9 facepalmy Mr. Jesuses out of 10. Instead of addressing the actual question about suffering, he quickly shifts the focus to free will, ignoring major aspects of the problem of evil, such as natural disasters or suffering unrelated to human choices. He misrepresents determinism as fatalistic resignation, ignoring philosophical positions like compatibilism or nuanced secular understandings of agency. He offered no substantive argument, he just asserts free will as a solution without justifying why suffering is necessary for meaningful choice, nor does he acknowledge the existing counterarguments, like why an omnipotent God couldn't create a world where people freely chose good. He started his answer so right. He initially states, I don't know, which is refreshingly honest. However, he immediately pivots to asserting an answer with confidence, as though free will neatly resolves the problem. He says, I don't know, but here's the reason. This is contradictory and evasive. He then presents a false dichotomy. His framing implies that the only alternative to free will is robotic determinism, which is misleading and ignores the spectrum of philosophical positions. His hypothetical scenario, that is giving money versus punching someone, oversimplifies moral decision making and presents a misleading binary view of free will. His whole response is incredibly weak and evasive response, especially from someone of his experience. It lacks philosophical depth, misrepresents opposing views, and relies on rhetorical tricks rather than serious engagement. That's it for this one. So now I'm turning this over to you. What do you think? Did I take down Cliff here? Or do you think he got one over on me? Let me know in the comments. Now, if you found my calling out of Cliff's attempted verbal sleight of hand enjoyable, show me by hitting that like button. Though if you want to see me hold more people to the key issues, you can have fresh content delivered to your YouTubes weekly by hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Though speaking of being key, I need to give an extra thanks to the key players in my channel, my patrons, especially the big keys, Calamitous Anima and Sora. Though the rest of you are worth far more than 100 rupees to me. If you'd like to join them, you can unlock your philosophical depths for as low as $1 a month. I don't know how many rupees that is, at patreon.com/darkofalltrades. Now I know I say this nearly every time, but I sincerely appreciate all of you who like, subscribe, share a video, or just hang out in the live chat. I've been fortunate enough to have some more people here in the Atheist Counter-Apologetics content creation community hang out in the live, and I love seeing the sheer amount of excellent thoughts that you all bring to the table. Whether you're a content creator or simply a content enjoyer, or whatever your reasoning for being here is, thank you for hanging out with me today. And as always, keep learning.
So that